All right, welcome in, everybody. This is the Bonjour with Blythe podcast, and you might be used to the usual sort of set the tone, set the mood with the music, intro, and all of that jazz. But for this special edition, and as you might be able to tell from the show title, we're peeking behind the curtain and looking at the business side of podcasting. And so not only are we looking at the business side of podcasting, but I'm also joined with two co-hosts for the first time in a very long time for me. So first up, we have Badr Milligan, co-founder and host of the Shortbox podcast, plus co-founder of the Jacksonville Podcasters Group. Badr.
Hello, Badr Milligan speaking.
And we also have Al Pete, who is a host of several different podcasts, including the Groove Suite and owner of Mr. Peterson's Neighborhood.
Yeah. How y'all doing?
Now, as sort of the name of the episode suggests, over the last few months, we've sort of seen a real-time view, a peek behind the curtain of the business side of podcasting. Now, a few months ago, Joe Rogan, who is currently on YouTube and has been sort of the OG in the game since I think he started in 2009 podcasting. He's also been on YouTube for the majority of that time as well. He signed a historic deal to move over to Spotify starting September 1st. So he was kind of the first sort of podcaster in the game to really make a name for himself, and moving over to Spotify, more of an exclusive contract later in the year. I think he's also going to have some YouTube stuff he's still going to have the clips, but he's not going to have the full show and the full video. Those are transitioning over to Spotify exclusively by the end of the year. So we saw that big record contract. And then we also saw an incident with the podcast by the name of Call Her Daddy, which was in a very public dispute with Barstool Sports, basically fighting over, the two co-hosts were fighting over control of their IP, Call Her Daddy show. And then it ultimately sort of, I guess, just ruined the two co-hosts' friendship. They were roommates at the time. It's completely severed ties with each other. And so what you have is a situation where the podcast has essentially moved on, still with Barstool, but now it's a separated co-host and they've gone their separate ways. And then this week, we've had another trailblazing show where the Joe Budden Podcast dropped some bombs on us. And so, Badr, why don't you go ahead and set up that story of everything surrounding that?
Thank you, Blythe. Joe Budden, the media mogul and rapper, announced that he will not be renewing his 2-year exclusive run with Spotify after his contract ends this month. He gave a lot more details and reasons why in this week's episode of his self-titled podcast, of course, starting for episode 375, Views from the Spot, and episode 376, We're Not the Same, both released Wednesday and Saturday, respectively. He essentially dismantled his exclusive deal with the streaming giant Spotify. He was once deemed, some people, I think he was called, the Howard Stern of hip hop by the New York Times at one point. He's really only kind of had his podcast for a short time, relatively speaking, when you compare it to some of the, like a Joe Rogan. He launched his podcast in 2015. He signed an exclusive deal with Spotify in 2018. That, of course, is coming to an end at the end of this month. He used this week's 2 episodes to kind of vent and really talk about the deal at a very unprecedented level of detail, talking about the different gripes he's had with the contract, with the company, with Spotify, some of the shortcomings, and just kind of putting it all out there on why he's making the decision not to stay exclusive with Spotify, even though they are bringing in a lot of shows this month.
So first thoughts, I guess I should ask after listening to both of those shows. Al, I'll go to you first.
I was like, classes in session. It was maybe like the first 5 minutes of it. I was just like, yo, I know where this is going. I was like, I know this is going. But then when it was getting deeper and deeper, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe I need to like really sit down and listen to this. And then when I was sitting down, I was like, well, maybe I need to like put some things on hold real quick to really listen to it. And then the more I got into it, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have to listen to this at least once or twice a week just to see what type of playground that we in. Because I've had so many questions about podcasting, just the legal aspect of it. So for him to answer basically all those questions and just those thoughts, I was like, wow, like it was really a wow moment. I mean, I've talked to a couple people here and there about it, but overall for me, I was just like, yo, this is this is a lesson that can really be beneficial to like all, a lot of podcasters. I mean, it's simple and plain. Just it's like a book of Tribe Called Quest said with Q-Tip is a industry rule
number 480
industry these record labels are shady. Yeah, like it's that and then some. So I was like, wow, this is crazy.
To echo what you said, I think that was the reception that a lot of fellow podcasters had, and not just podcasters, but just I had a friend that who's not a podcaster but enjoys the Joe Budden podcast, hit me up like, yo, you've got to listen to this ASAP. Like, I'm over here learning a bunch of things. So I can only imagine what this episode means to you. I seen a tweet that I think really kind of encompasses how some of the things you were just saying, Al, and especially how I feel. It says something to the effect that today's Joe Budden podcast is a masterclass on the value of contracts. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of hits the nail on the head, because I don't know too many podcasts or hosts or really anyone that, especially like these big kind of media talent kind of moguls and people that are like Joe Budden and above, really divulge that level of detail of their contract. Joe Budden's always had a knack for being like very blunt, very honest, mm-hmm. for better or worse, sometimes to his detriment. But this one was just, for me, my jaw was on the ground like, holy crap. Like, yo, he is sharing everything, like things that I can only imagine what someone on the other, the receiving end, I can only imagine what being a Spotify rep or, someone that's working on that contract is thinking, like, what is he doing? That was kind of my reaction, was like, wow, go, Joe, go.
But you know what? But even with that, I would be very shocked to know if somebody on the Spotify end of it would be like, wow, why did he do that? Being the person that he is. But it just shows a lot about, it's Joe Budden, man. Joe Budden ain't gonna hold no punches when it comes to a lot of feelings and thoughts that he has in regards to it. Like, he kept saying he's from music. You know what I'm saying? He comes from the music aspect. Mm-hmm. That was, when he was saying that, like, for me, when he was talking about the podcast, that's one thing, because I'm a podcaster and I run a network. But then for him to say I come from the music side, I'm like, I'm an MC too. So I'm in the music world. So for him to directly say that, I'm like, I know all these things. So in my mind, I'm like, why don't these companies understand the people who they're dealing with? And it just makes them think like, it makes me think like, wow, they're not really paying attention to who they're dealing with. Because if they would have known Joe Budden the way that he is and how radical he is and how left and right field he goes, him saying something like that, and you got to think about it too. They've probably been holding this for a long time.
Yeah, this episode made me try to recollect, like, how many times have I heard them say something about Spotify
and didn't say it?
Yeah, like how many maybe subliminals have they mentioned? Because for example, like, they brought up the lack of holidays and some of the treatment that they were having. Like, very, I felt
close
like
to a year ago, they started airing in respect to the grievances that he's airing. It was about a year ago when he was talking about, we've been going at this and we've been doing, 3-hour shows twice a week for this mm-hmm. long, and we mm-hmm. want to take some vacation time. We feel like we deserve it. And Spotify basically said no and kind of hinted at the fact that, or Joe Budden took the thought process of that Spotify essentially needed them to keep posting new content.
Yeah. He made it seem, he was very adamant, not just made it seem, but he was very adamant that they were driving, their content was extremely valuable to them. And I've always thought about, Joe Budden's output. As a podcaster, I know how much work goes into just one podcast. I do one a week, and that takes up a lot of time between planning and actually recording, editing, blah, 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 blah. So I always thought from the get-go, and I've been listening to Joe Budden when he wasn't Spotify exclusive. So when he made the jump to Spotify and I learned that he's doing 2 episodes a week, I remember even thinking like, holy moly, like, yo, that is a lot.
So he wasn't doing 2 episodes per week prior to the Spotify move.
He used to drop 1 episode a week, and it was like 3.5 hours long. And I thought that him going to Spotify meant, okay, he'll just break out that 3.5 hour block, maybe 2 1-hour episodes. No, he's still maintained relatively pretty long shows, 2-hour episodes twice a week.
And that was also a similar complaint that he had when he mentioned that the reason that he moved to Spotify is because he wanted to know more about the analytics. And during the first few months of the contract, he got access to that information. And when he started asking questions, that's when that access sort of was cut off. Mm. And his thought process was, well, if a stream for 3 minutes is worth X amount, what is a podcast that's for 3 hours, that attention grabbing of 3 hours, what is that worth? I know it's worth a hell of a lot more, is basically what he was inferring.
And I'll be honest, when he started, and I remember when he started asking that question, I remember just early on, he would pose that question several times. And as someone who dabbles in this, it made me think a lot too, like, man, that is a great question. I wonder if we'll get an answer through his show. And it still kind of seems like, I don't know if I think that's still a point of contention, and a big role in this is that he's asking those questions. I don't think anyone's got the answer.
A couple of other things that was sort of attention grabbing to me is he said that in his contract, and he laid out a few specific items. He said that Spotify can't edit their show, which clearly after these couple episodes this week, Spotify probably would have edited a lot of that stuff out, but that was in his contract. He also said that he had final say for ad approval, which I thought was really interesting and really sort of a pioneer in that regard, because anybody who's been in podcasting, if you're on any kind of ad network or if you worked in radio, you know that you really don't have any kind of say over the advertising side of things. So I thought that was really interesting to hear from.
Hey, Al, was there anything specifically that he was kind of sharing as far as gripes or just things that he was exposing that got your attention or made you made you think?
Well, the number aspect of it, definitely. Like the whole if people listening to music, listen to music for 3 minutes and they get X amount of dollars, what does it mean for somebody that's listening for, for 2 hours or 3 hours? And what I was going to bring my point to on that was the fact that these people listen all the way through. This ain't no let me listen to it for 30 minutes. They even have their stuff timestamped. But for me, I occasionally listen to Joe Budden, but they have their stuff timestamped. But with this particular episode and the one that came out Saturday, I listened to, I went back and listened to the whole episode. Mm-hmm. I went to the specific one, but I went back and listened to it all the way through numerous times. So the number factor of it, that really stood out to me. What else stood out to me? It was just so much, man. Because like I said, I have questions about how this is run. Because I feel like the podcasting world is such a wild west, and it just don't seem like there's anything legal in place for podcasting when it comes to fair use and stuff like that. I mean, you got a little bit of stuff here and there, but they're using the platform of music. So that really kind of hit me. That really answered my question. A lot of those questions was answered for me, because I'm like, well, how are we going to run this independently, or to these platforms that we put our podcast on? Do we really own these rights? Are we really reading the fine print of this? Do people, even for the advertisements, I totally agree with the advertisement. For him to say, for him to go in and say, we getting these ads for these individuals and collectively, I was like, that's a move. And maybe that's why Spotify felt like they need to do what they do, because of that particular situation or situations. I don't know, but
and I am confused at some points, or at a few of the items he brought up, because on one hand, it seemed that he had a lot of say, being able to tell Spotify, hey, no, I'm not going to read your ads. But then on the other hand, the fact that he had to ask permission, because he mentioned something about sending it up, up channel and asking for days off, so there's this weird dichotomy of power and then lack of power in certain areas that you're well, that seems pretty reasonable, days off during Christmas. So, it's well, what power did he have? And how come, on the other hand, he couldn't get certain things that seemed, within reach, or just kind of plain like negotiation tactics.
Well, I think a lot of it almost stems from, because he did mention about working with several different people at Spotify. And, every couple months it was somebody else that he was talking to.
And Al, that made me think the most about record labels, because it made me think about someone like a Big Crit, who talked about when he joined Def Jam that he got in with Def Jam expecting to work with one individual that really championed his sound and like was going to look out for him. But as soon as he joined, he got kind of like, they got let go or moved somewhere else, and then he got kind of lost in the shuffle and eventually just got shelved. So it was, once again, I mean, you brought up like that music industry parallel. I think that is unfortunately the closest thing that we've got to compare this to. And it's crazy to see that a lot of the flaws with the music industry still are relevant and prevalent in podcasting.
Yeah, because they're using they're using that same platform. They're using the same blueprint as how music does, and it's like, I know for me personally, just from from common sense to learning stuff, what I'm saying, from reading, and even going to school for it, what I'm saying, for communications and media, we took that legal class, and like a lot of the law, we're constantly breaking laws every day that we don't even know. But from the podcast spectrum of it, it's like some of these things, like I can't, to me, and I'm still learning a lot of this, even though I've been podcasting forever.
Are we all?
As well,
yeah.
But we're still learning like this platform, this process. Even when people come and ask me, well, how do you monetize from podcasting? Like, it's a Wild West type of conversation, because it's like, you got ads, you can do that way, or you can get an investor to do that way. But it's like, at the end of the day, is there any type of like medium that we can go to and be like, okay, this is the platform we're going to run with versus the music? So it gives these bigger platforms an easier way to get money, an easier way to like dictate what goes on in podcasting. And it's like, nah, I think that's why it was so easy for Joe Rogan to get the deal that he got. You know what I'm saying? Like it was almost like a no-brainer. The only reason why it was such a big deal is because he'd been podcasting forever. When we didn't even know podcasting was podcasting, he was doing it, and his value of work. But the platforms that I feel like podcasts are using, that these companies are using, I feel like they're using it. They're like, okay, well, what platform can we use, or what blueprint can we use? And they're going straight to music. Maybe because it's kind of relevant. I don't know. But it's just weird. It's so Wild West, man. I keep saying it. It's so Wild West right now.
And you know what? To your point, hearing Joe voice his grievances, those, some of them I felt like, wait, you couldn't, that was a point of contention. Like, man, that's crazy. At the end of it, I did feel empowered. Hearing Joe kind of be that honest and push for creators, listen to what I'm telling you. And in a weird way too, I felt relieved that I wasn't too off base to be able to look at someone like a Joe Budden, who is undoubtedly one of the biggest podcast creators out there, that even he is going through these things that I've thought about, that I've put my that I've asked questions like, man, how does this work? It is kind of reassuring in a weird way, in a secondhand way, to know that even the top dogs are facing these dilemmas and asking these questions, and they're kind of lost in the dark too. I know that doesn't that's not what we want. We want clear answers. We want to be able to solve these things, but there is a sense of reassurance for someone at our level that that they're going through the same thing too.
And I think one of the bigger lessons too from the whole fiasco is looking back on the move that Joe Rogan is making to Spotify, in which it's a licensing deal. And he's been very, very specific when he does talk about it on YouTube, that it is a licensing deal. And I think he even made a comment about a month ago on the episode with Bill Burr, which I'll link to in the show notes, because it was a really fascinating discussion on sort of the relative nature of comics and creators parameters and controlling your destiny. But Joe Rogan mentioned that Spotify has already reached out to him and asked him, who do you think is going to be the first guest on the show? And Joe just kind of groans, like, just whoever it's going to be. That was his response. So you could kind of tell that maybe there's already a little bit of, I don't want to say animosity there, but there definitely is a little bit. There was a hint in Joe Rogan's tone that, oh, well, what did I get myself into? But on the flip side, he's also protected that it's a licensing deal. He's not being exclusive to Spotify yet.
I guess I'm so used to just watching Joe Rogan on YouTube. I mean, is his podcast not available on Spotify now? I know that might be a complete dumb question, but I've got to ask.
Well, I know that the way that he formats his show is he has 2 different channels on YouTube. He has the one where it's the full, complete show, and then he has the clips. My understanding of the deal is that the podcast version of the full show and the video is going to Spotify. Meanwhile, the clips will always be on YouTube.
Well, so so currently, right now, does he distribute his audio as a podcast on platforms?
That's a good question. I honestly have no idea because I really only on
exactly.
Spotify. I only listen to Joe Budden.
I only listen to Joe. I only consume Joe Rogan via YouTube. Right. So when I heard this deal, I was like, wait, are you telling me Joe Rogan has literally stuck with one platform? Like, because I just never bothered or cared to look up Joe Rogan on Apple Podcasts or Spotify.
He's on Apple though, because I follow him on Apple.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, for me, Joe Rogan's podcast, it's 2-3 hours long a lot of the times. I don't have that kind of time. So, and he's recording damn near every single day. So for me to sit through a 3-hour podcast almost every day, that's not realistic. The way I consume Joe Rogan is through the clips. So it's not necessarily going to change my listening habits to his show, because I'll see a clip. If it catches my attention, I'll listen to it. And I might, if it's interesting, I'll watch the next clip, that shows up in the YouTube algorithm. But I think that was even Joe Budden hinted to it, that was the reason why that Rogan was leaving YouTube, is because YouTube wasn't being clear on their analytics either.
Yeah.
Wild West.
But I guess...
Yeah, right, wow. Right.
Well, to sort of, not to be outdone as far as making the news rounds this week, but Charlemagne the God, who is the host of the famous Breakfast Club radio show, he had some comments on Joe Budden and basically said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that Budden has burned a bridge everywhere he's been. And he also had an issue with Joe Budden comparing his show to the networks like Ringer and Gimlet and, those platforms bringing in a ton of shows versus his show that is just one single show. How did you feel about Charlemagne's comments?
I will. So I tend to quickly, or I usually have like my guard up when it comes to Charlemagne, because it's Charlemagne. And if you've been a fan of of hip hop culture, you just know Charlemagne and Joe Budden are kind of like in the same circle. Like, you could just take it with a grain of salt, and that they kind of they tend to add some flair to it. But I do see Charlemagne's point of view, and reading his comments kind of put things in perspective. I was like, man, he is right. I mean, this Joe is comparing himself to a network, though Joe will tell you, like, hey, when we talk about the Joe Budden podcast, we're not just talking about me. We're talking about everyone involved with creating this show. And I think he had said something on one of those between the 2 episodes that there are, hundreds of people and, at least 100 people involved in his show, or a good number 100. Of them. It was something. It was something. Don't quote me. But I mean, Charlemagne raises a good question, and this kind of goes to what you were saying, Al. When you look at someone like Joe Budden, who has had several ventures, both in music, he also did radio for a while, and now podcasting. And you start looking at the trends of, like, man, you've always kind of been in a shitty deal. You've always been in a very peculiar situation, a less than ideal situation. I think it's fair to ask, is it really the other person, or is it you? You know what they say, like, if everyone's crazy, is it them or is it you? So I think there is a level of fairness in his assessment, especially, opposing to Joe, like, you're comparing, yourself to these massive networks that produce podcasts that have multiple shows. You might have the number one podcast for, this month or this year. But these guys might have the top, 5 podcasts are in the top 10. So, that you've got to account for that value.
And IP as well. I think that was a big part of the deal, which going back to the Call Her Daddy show, that was a sort of, I guess, a linchpin in the whole negotiations, is that they wanted the IP. Barstool wanted the IP. And so with the billions of dollars that Spotify paid for Gimlet and Ringer, they're getting the IP of all of those shows, which sort of makes you feel bad about the hosts and the creators of all of those shows. It's like, what do they get out of the deal? The people at the top, the Bill Simmons of the world, are probably raking in the cash, but what are those hosts getting that built those shows from the ground up?
Yeah. Al, what do you think about Charlemagne's comments on Joe?
That's good that y'all brought that perspective up in regards to like him being in all these, I guess, bad deals. I didn't look at it like that. But at the same time, too, when he was mentioning Gimlet and podcasts and stuff like that, I took it as like, okay, he's in, like, Spotify acquired or bought out or whatever these companies, and his numbers were still like crushing the people that were on there, regardless if it was 6 shows on top or 1 on top. You know what I'm saying? Like, his show was still prominent on there. And I kind of looked at it too, like, well, if you're saying you're supposed to give me a bonus, but you over here buying companies for all these $1 million, then like, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, what's really going on with that? And this apparently was going on after he was actually on the show. Actually, when he, in the process of his deal. So, I mean, looking at it from Charlemagne aspect of it, I mean, both of them are employed by somebody, but I guess Joe Budden has more guts enough to speak on it from the creator, from the street side. You know what I'm saying? Which it's a thin line with that, man. Because when it comes to the creator side and then the admin side, like it's like that fine line that we have to play along. Like I know for me personally, I try to watch a lot of stuff that I say online, especially even on Twitter. Even though I feel like Twitter is like, that's my safe place. I can say whatever I want to say, but I do understand that there are a lot of like admin people looking at me and saying that I might be problematic to their situations or whatever. So, but the fact that he championed so much for like the creator and the streets or whatever, I know for me personally, and in the state of mind that we're in right now, like it seems like, okay, Joe Budden can really take his platform and really go anywhere or not go anywhere at all and still be sustainable versus Charlemagne over there at iHeart. You know what I'm saying? And he might be bound to this contract, or it just might be a differences in their lifestyles. Like Charlemagne might be like, look, I gotta feed my family. But Joe Budden might be like, I'm going for the streets, and the streets going to take care of me regardless.
I think that there's a lot of sort of rivalry and a little bit of jealousy with the legacy radio companies versus podcasting. I sort of faced a lot of that on both sides with not going to school for journalism, being a blogger, not going to school for broadcasting, and eventually becoming a radio host. Yeah. I experienced that animosity from both sides. So I wonder if Charlemagne, if that's the place where he's coming from, is from just a radio veteran who doesn't like the podcasting world and the power that these creators essentially have.
Well, but I mean, it's a lot of people that have went to school for it and everything, and they're just not as equipped and creative and innovative like a person that quote unquote comes off the street. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, but I get that because when I was in school, I learned that, like the whole intro to communications. Now, granted, when I was in school, I recently just got my degree. So when I was getting my degree, a lot of the stuff that I was learning about, I already knew and I was in it. But I didn't realize like people were really like looking down on people that didn't have actual degrees and certifications in blogging. I didn't realize people looked at blogging the way that they did. Like, journalists be looking at bloggers like...
Even like, PR departments.
Like, you're a joke. You this, that, the third. So, that is crazy. Yeah, it's crazy you
it's
say
even,
that.
Well, if I can chime in, I don't know if that might be... if that is Charlemagne's motivation per se, because I know that he does have his own podcast that's very successful, the Brilliant Idiots. I think it's just Charlemagne is more of a company man. Like he's always been associated with a company, even like in his early days when he was oh my God, I'm having a brain fart in his original show that he was a co-host in. But he's always been associated with some sort of company, and you could make that same argument with Joe. But I think Joe is coming from a position where he's had to completely reinvent himself, and between Complex. Daily struggle, and then especially like the podcast. I think the podcast is where he was able to really reinvent himself and then use that as a launching pad for like Revolt and then his own series on Pull Up and things like that.
Well, he's a commentator now, which is very similar to what Joe Rogan did. Is he started out commentating on fights, and now they're retro and respective to their each individual, I guess, niches. They're basically at the top of the game. Like
they're both friends. Like I think I'm pretty sure they've discussed this offline, and sometimes. The way I view those type of conversations, it only makes me think, well, I wonder if maybe Joe reached out to Charlemagne and said, hey, this is what I've got these goals. It's all cool. Let's keep this kind of facade and, it's showbiz.
Yeah, frenemies.
Yeah, they've got to, I think that there's got to be a little bit of that to consider as well.
Wow. Now, that's interesting to me. Maybe because I don't look at it. I know in my line of work and what I do, like I'm not really big on competition and not really big on like frenemies and stuff like that. I'm like, look, if the person can do the job, do it, regardless if it's degrees or not. If somebody's, supersedes this person, then maybe that other person might not be doing the work. It's just kind of fair game. But for that to be a factor, y'all explaining that definitely gives me a different thought on it. I didn't look at it like that, but. Yeah.
Now, speaking from, I guess, the following a favorite creator point of view, have you followed a creator to a different platform?
Yeah, Joe Budden is the reason why I use Spotify as my podcast player of choice now. And I mean, maybe not 100%, but he was a big influence. I always thought that Apple... it's amazing that they can rest on their laurels when it comes to like the podcast app that the stock podcast app that comes with all iPhones, that they've never updated, that it's still very kind of glitchy to me. It's not very user friendly. I just have a lot of quarrels with Apple Podcasts, but it was my main podcast player of choice for years until Joe moved to Spotify. And I was like, well, shit. I mean, I guess I'll go ahead and start listening to Joe Budden. And since I'm always on here all the time listening to his show 2 times a week, I might as well add on my other podcasts. So to your point, to answer your question, yeah, I got to give Joe Budden, he's probably the creator I follow into another app.
Will you guys follow him to wherever other platform, and will you change your listening habits as far as your podcast app of choice is concerned?
Nah, I don't think I would change it. I mean, I primarily rock with Apple. Like everything, when it comes to podcasts, it's always Apple. But I mean, I share the same thoughts as you. Like, I only use Spotify for Joe Budden. I mean, I've stumbled over a lot of other stuff like Jamel Hill. I listen to her podcast on Spotify. But yeah, Joe Budden was the main reason why I enlisted Spotify on my apps.
there are a couple exclusives, but not really. Michelle Obama is one that I've listened to a couple of her podcasts, but most of the other podcasts are all available on all these other platforms. So I use Overcast. I don't even mess with Apple. I use Overcast. I set my queue for the day, or really for months long. I have so many episodes that are just waiting to be listened to because there's so many good shows out there. But I like the organizational aspects of the other apps.
Joe Budden might be the only podcast I would consider moving to another app. If it's a free app, then for sure, I probably will follow. If it's a paid app, there is a high possibility I might do so, only because I respect Joe Budden in a weird way as a colleague. I do respect that he's always on the side of the creator. I have learned a lot. I have been inspired by a lot, and I don't think I've ever felt like I've had a kinship with another podcaster like Joe Budden.
Yeah, because you've actually traveled to see his live show before, which Spotify took an enormous cut off of as well.
Yeah, which is, I mean, and Al, man, as someone who comes from music yourself, it is crazy to hear. Like you could just replace the word podcasting with, with the phrase music, record label or music contract, because hearing him talk about Spotify essentially doing a 360 deal where they're getting a piece of every single thing. Even like when he brought up like whatever Maul's doing or whatever, Rory's side hustle or whatever Parks is doing and Joe Budden's other non-Spotify related ventures.
IP.
It's like, what are you crazy? Like how dare they have the audacity to ask such a thing? But I think that's why I would feel so strongly about considering paying for podcasting, even though I am a firm believer. Like I don't really, I'm not a fan of like accessing content behind a paywall per se.
Yes.
Especially if that's the only choice. Like I would like to have a free option, and if I choose to do so, I'll go through the paywall. But yeah, I'd probably say Joe Budden. I would strongly consider.
Knowing how he was treated, does that make you want to avoid future Spotify exclusive podcasts? Because our podcasting host Buzzsprout is very adamant about being anti Spotify. They took all of their podcasts off of Spotify because they did not believe in what Spotify was trying to do to the market. Buzzsprout is very much a proponent of a free and open market. So does knowing how Joe was treated affect your listening habits to other podcasters on Spotify?
I'm about to sound like a big contradiction because, well, our situations are a little different. And that's because we're not at that level. Like we can't just make a choice like that and essentially cut out. I think Spotify is, if not my second, it's definitely between my second and third most. That's where I get like my second or third most views. Apple Podcast is still like the number one spot where we get our most downloads and plays. Spotify is usually like number 2 or 3. I'm not in a position financially or status wise where I can just cut out that much of my listenership. What about you, Al?
So I was this, I guess, is the insider of MPN Network, but I was trying to figure out like a way just to try to get the network on Spotify, Apple, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Just see if I can take the network and say, hey, let's try to work a deal in the level that I can level on. I'm not making Joe Budden numbers, but you know what I'm saying? That, just the belief in it. And I really prided on like all of our podcasters on the network to get on Spotify. I was like, because I was seeing everybody else on Spotify. So when I even promoted through the website, I would put Spotify first and then put Buzzsprout second, or it would just be that SoundCloud. If some of them still use SoundCloud for whatever reason. But I was looking to, like, Spotify was kind of like my thing. I was like, all right, well, podcasting ain't that bad on Spotify. Let me pay more attention to this. You know what I'm saying? And how they do things and how they run, or how, just the aesthetics, all of that. So I remember telling my homeboy about this, and my homeboy was the one that told me to listen to the podcast because he was like, yeah, I know you mentioned Spotify and I know what you're trying to do. So now I'm like, I don't know. Like, I feel like I need to go back and read the fine print on like a lot of this stuff. Making you second guess.
Like, so I guess the move or the promotion to Spotify, I guess.
What this definitely does is the day that I should get, approached by Spotify for exclusivity, then I'll really consider like, I don't know.
They're going to play this podcast and they're going to say, sir, explain yourself.
Y'all did my boy kind of dirty, but I don't think that. I think those type of decisions, a Joe Rogan, a Joe Budden, any of a Michelle Obama, a Charlemagne, I think they could make those decisions without hindering their growth and expansion. I think for folks at our level, and I say that with full respect, podcasters at our level, we just need as many channels and platforms as that we can provide.
Well, that actually brings me to my next sort of switching gears to the creator perspective. After listening to these 2 episodes this week from Joe Budden, does this give you any ideas for changes to your current monetization or distribution plans?
Well, in regards to the network, I sent the first episodes to all the people on the network, and I was like, look, I need y'all to listen to this, and we need to have a conversation. Because in my mind, I'm like, I felt like that conversation that Joe Budden had, it was definitely on some, all right, so what do you want out of this? Like, it was like, I had to, it was, to me, I had to step back and be like, so what do I really want? Do I really want that bag and, that platform to do this? Or do I want to be able to have independent control over this? Like, all these type of creative questions. So that's why I sent it to the people on the network. Because like I said, previously I've been having these conversations in my head, like trying to figure out how, like if it's like music, then yeah, I have my own masters and all that stuff. Like, but I don't know how that podcasting aspects work. When of course when you include IP, et cetera, but creative wise, yeah, it's definitely that question. Like, well, what are you doing this for? Like, how do you want this to look? Mm-hmm. And that's the question I had to ask myself. But I answered that quickly. I was like, look, I know I'm doing all this for, of course, for the love and the passion for it.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But, at the end of the day, well, we all 3 of us individually, we've been doing it for a great minute, and we would definitely love to have some type of monetization from it. You know what I'm saying? Fair enough, because we're providing the skills and the passion and all that. So it should be rewarded.
Yeah.
But, it got me thinking, like, from my aspect, it got me thinking a little bit. But from the network aspect, I definitely need to have a conversation with everybody on that, because I need to know where they at. Like, if y'all own this just to get a bag, then we need to plan another route for that. But at the end of the day, MPN, like, I'm all about community. I'm all about dignity, all that. So I want people to have fun on here and be able to build something. And if that's not Joe mode, then we need to figure something else out.
That's a good response. That's
and
a great
to piggyback
response.
off that, Joe Budden even mentioned, he's like, Spotify acts like they got the biggest dick in the room, but they only control 10% of the market share for podcasting. So you're really almost affecting your future and your livelihood by only being exclusive to Spotify.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look at Apple. Like, out of this whole thing, when I was studying or paying attention to Spotify, I was always asking the question, like, I wonder what Apple doing. But it seemed like Apple is like that.
I swear to God, I feel like they forget, like, they have this damn app on here. Because to your point, I have asked myself, like, damn, why is Spotify getting all these exclusive podcasts, but the number 1 podcast app, definitely in my world, I don't know too many exclusive podcast apps. Exclusive Apple podcasts. I know Spotify has exclusive podcasts. I know Luminary, right? Luminary?
Yeah, Luminary, which is trash.
Yeah, another podcast app notorious for like scooping up these exclusive shows. And Al, I don't. I'm sure you might be aware of this, but and Blythe as well, but I was telling her about how Apple Music and Spotify, that is one thing Apple Music does do. Apple does do. What they were doing is they were doing exclusive album releases, teaming up with certain art. I think Drake was like exclusive Apple for a while. The Frank Ocean was, I think, the last instance where either of these companies were doing exclusive deals because they ended up getting screwed out in the end. And I wonder if that had any impact into Apple thinking, all right, well, we're just not going to do exclusives, period. But
I feel like, but I feel like Apple has other things to worry about. I mean, they got products and everything.
And I think I'm sorry, and I think that is why they don't really or seem to care or bother for exclusive podcasts. Is because to your point, as well as some things that Joe Budden was saying about Spotify, you guys don't have hardware. You guys don't have any tangible goods. Apple does. Apple, I'm sure that they probably make most of their money off of, their hardware they sell, whether it be phones, TV, Apple TV, et cetera, et cetera. I think
because every hardware they have, it's going to have the Apple Podcast on there.
Right.
Yep.
Like the app automatically on there. Period. I feel like they the grand. I feel like that granddaddy, the granddaddy in the family that. They know they just watching and seeing what's going on and like, okay, boy.
Yeah.
We're gonna let y'all do this. We're gonna see how y'all play out at the end.
Well, because they kind of did the same thing with their TV show offerings with Apple TV, that they kind of sat back for a while and then signed a bunch of exclusive TV rights deals or Apple shows. And maybe that was them experimenting with that medium. And if it was successful, or to Apple's, I guess, definition of successful, then they would replicate that same model to podcasters. But it's kind of unreal that they've controlled, the overwhelming, like something like, I think at one point, 90% of the market share, and they've done absolutely nothing with it.
And you know what? We ain't, and look, we're not on here dissing Apple at all.
No, not at all. If you want to send a check, I will send you the address.
I'm saying that as like, look at Apple like very hands-on and they still control the market. It makes me wonder if any of this will backfire on Spotify. Like, are they making a revenue? Are they making a profit off of all of these exclusive deals? Or are they just kind of just hoping that, hey, we're going to make enough ad money? And what does this do, too, to them in future shows? I mean, Joe Budden being so vocal about his contract and giving these like tidbits and warnings, what does that do to the next podcast that they try to scoop up? And they're like, hey, we're also not going to read our ads. Like, that would be detrimental to them.
Yeah, because you talk about a bit of or Joe Budden talked about the conflicts of Bill Simmons, who's the owner of The Ringer, ESPN veteran, had a famous falling out with them over their 30 for 30 series. But you kind of had like a weird dynamic with Bill Simmons just calling Joe Budden out of nowhere and offering to record the show when his father is dying. And that very was weird dynamic. Yeah. You could tell that Bill Simmons maybe is on a different level with the executives than Joe Budden is or was.
That is like that is the most perfect example of sticking your nose in something that has nothing to fucking do with you.
Which if you're a sports fan, you follow Bill Simmons, it's pretty expected that this guy is going to stick his nose where it doesn't belong.
I wanted to answer your question as far as how this might change like my method of monetization. And I will say it's influenced me to lean in more into what I'm currently doing, because I will say I'm very prideful, and that my monetization methods, be it Patreon and sponsorships as well, is that I am very I am involved with those, like directly involved. There is no middleman. There's no one collecting, a little bit. I am directly involved with the patrons that, support us on the show, as well as our sponsor, Gotham City Limit. Like, I directly speak to them. I directly have a relationship. We negotiate directly. And I think that it's only encouraged me to try to keep as much control over that business side as I can, not to bring in a third party or someone for representation just yet.
Well, I will say, with respects to Patreon, it technically is a third party. I covered this in my last episode, where the Patreon has actually been faced with a slew of lawsuits. What happened with Patreon in jest is they essentially kicked off a few people from their platform for advocating, hate speech and things like that. That's essentially opened up the doors, because that opened up the doors to future lawsuits. There was a lawsuit that was filed that creator actually won, because that was their sole source of income. Patreon didn't provide any kind of explanation as far as why they were being kicked off, but they got kicked off anyways, and so they lost their whole revenue stream. And so because of that, a judge ruled in favor of the creator, which now opens Patreon up to a bunch of lawsuits in the future. So I guess maybe try to peel the curtain back a little bit for us on Patreon itself. I mean, not to say that you guys, obviously would participate in any kind of hate speech that would cause you to get kicked off, unless, they're maybe like DC fans or something. But I would say maybe, does Patreon take any kind of fees? Like, what's in it for Patreon for you guys to use them as a fun provider.
Definitely, they take a small fee out of your payouts,
Okay.
But our tiers are relatively pretty affordable, pretty cheap for the most part. I think our highest tier, is a $50 per month tier, but our more accessible ones are like $2, $5, and $9. So I mean, when you do the math, it comes out to like 53 cents, of this month, and etc. So they do take a small fee. It's never been. No, it hasn't been anything where it's been like, damn, man, what am I? It hasn't been enough to make me question getting off the platform. And I think until we have a solution to have an application or some sort of platform that people can directly, pay us or support us or be contributors and patrons, it's just right now, I think, our best tool.
Well, I do know as a web designer, developer, that in that field, I do know that there are options out there. So if you are a podcaster looking for alternatives, maybe a backup plan to a Patreon model, there are alternatives out there that you can collect payments directly on your website. I know WooCommerce subscriptions is one of them. And I know the Sam Harris podcast, he actually has a dedicated funding model. I'm not exactly sure of what platform or what payment gateway that he uses for his podcast, but I know that he left Patreon specifically because he was nervous about their move into deciding what's acceptable speech and what isn't.
That's cool. I will also say that it's made me want to be prepared for because I'm very optimistic. I feel like one day we will be we'll have a contract or something come to us, and it's made me consider those talks, like prepare, even if I don't get them, at least I want to be prepared for what do I want to ask, what do I expect, and maybe to what Al was saying, it's made me ask, okay, what do I want? What does success look like? What do I want from a partnership or a sponsorship or a contract like that? What is the purpose?
Yeah.
Now, Al, you operate the podcast network, Mr. Peterson's Neighborhood. And for those who don't know what a podcast network does, sort of give us the rundown of the pros of why a new podcast would want to join a network.
So you want me to give the pros and the cons?
Sure.
Okay. So the pros, the main focus of the podcast network, basically just to get a hub going. Just like with the podcasting group, I mean, it's a group of people together, and we share resources. It's kind of simple. It's like we have a bunch of creators. It's that I learned that this podcasting stuff is like a lone sport. I didn't realize how much of a lone sport this was until I went to Podfest and I was listening to everybody's stories, and it was like, you're in front of the microphone and you're recording, and I was just like, wow, I'm in a sport that's really in a lone sport, and you just hope that somebody's listening to it. So I didn't want other people feeling that way as well. So I was like, I just want to build this community so people can feel comfortable in the skin that they're in to be able to present the stuff that they want. So that's the pros of it, just having that unity aspect of it. Definitely when it comes to resources, any type of resource that I kind of come through, I pass it on to them. I do feel like I'm in a bigger spectrum of getting information more so than the average podcaster, so to say, if that makes sense. So I just try to pass on very knowledgeable information that comes my way. Sometimes exclusive stuff, whether they want to build a portfolio when it comes to, because I have podcasters that are like bloggers, writers, you know what I'm saying? So I want to be able to expand them on that side of things because I want to intertwine podcasting with a lot of other stuff. Like one of my homies, he's a videographer. So we trying to choreograph that, and so I just be able to have a hub that shares information.
I've never heard it broken down that way. That's like the lone sport and just your motivation to share resources. I mean, that's like admirable. That's really cool.
So yeah, I mean, listen, when I got into this rap game, man, I mean, even till now, and I'm a diehard Duval hip hop artist. That's out of everything that I do, and I know a lot of people know me for DJing primarily because I do that a lot. But at the end of the day, I am a Duval hip hop artist, and I pride on that a lot. I'm a hip hop artist, but I'm definitely a hip hop artist from Jacksonville, Florida, and I represent that very well. I stand in that, but I didn't get a lot of resources when I first started. Like when I was reaching out to people, I would ask people, hey, what studios to go to or who's doing this and that, and I wouldn't get the information. And I just remember feeling like I felt so defeated when I was going through that journey, and I had to learn how to figure all this stuff out. And this was like 2005, 6. You know what I'm saying? We didn't have none of the resources that we have now back in 2005. So just imagine going through that journey and not being able to get that information, even from your colleagues. Just to be straight up, you know what I'm saying? From the colleagues that I work with, that the coworkers. I always felt like it was an alone sport. So I never wanted to, any type of thing that I'm doing, I never wanted to have people feel like they didn't have no resources or no type of support or any type of hope. A lot of people say I give a lot of hope. Like people, they be like, Pete, you give so much hope to a lot of things. And if that's my role, then so be it. So when it comes to like anything, I guess I pride at that, me putting this network together for the simple fact of hope. You know what I'm saying? Like the next person might not notice them or might not know how to relate to it. So a person like me, I can kind of generalize it and make people understand like this person might be speaking on this on mental health or sports or whatever, and it's coming from their direction. Maybe I'm the one that can explain it and make other people be able to tie into it. So that's like the major pro for me when it comes to that. But the con of it, I mean, just dealing with people, just dealing with different. I mean, dealing with people. You got one crew of people. They never respond to the chats. You know what I'm saying? To the group chats you got, but they will come out the gate when it's time to go and be like, I'm ready to go. But then you got the people that's always chatting and whatever, and then the words don't match with the actions. So you're just dealing with different personalities. This COVID situation definitely showed a lot of that. Some people have really like not fell off, but just really went to the backside. But then you got other people that just turned it completely up. So, just dealing with different people, man. And even with the con now, like not knowing, like this whole Joe Budden situation, I'm telling you, like for me, I'm like, I got to have a conversation with like everybody. I don't know if I need to have it individually. I would love to have it collectively, being the fact that we are a collective. But I'm like, we got to have this conversation to find out exactly where y'all at. And that's a pivotal type of conversation I got to have. So that's rough. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't come as nice Al, hopeful Al. I got to come on some admin tip and be like, all right, this is how I vision the network to look. And this is what I want everybody to go. If everybody not on that path, we got to figure something out. Either we could figure another lane, or this might not be the spot for you. So I don't like having them hard conversations, but we got to have those hard conversations.
Are there any certain milestones that you require for anybody to join the network? Do you have to have a certain amount of downloads per episode, or is it mainly just a sort of a community aspect where you're lifting each other up?
It's more so community based, but at the same time, I'm getting more. Like I've been telling like my business partner MJ Baker and my homie Larry, DJ Larry Love. I've been telling them, and the people on the podcast network, I've been telling them like, look, I got to get out of producer mode. And when I say producer, meaning like coming in the studio, setting up the mics and stuff like that. And I don't mind doing that and doing the editing and all that stuff.
So you provide the editing for them too.
Well, so it's like 15 of them on the network. So 4. So 4 of them I do the editing.
That's a lot.
All that stuff.
Al, you were talking about Alone Sports. I literally, before we hit record on this, I just got done editing my episode this week. And that was like a 2-3 hour ordeal. So you're doing 4 podcasts editing?
Yeah.
God, man.
Yeah, I'm not
Hats
them out,
off.
man. And but I understand that, I mean, at the end of the day, it got to get done. So
yeah, it does.
even with all of that, like I've been telling my people, I'm like, I gotta step out of this role and get into the more of the marketing and the managerial role of things. Cause I'm like, people just see me as a producer and that's cool. But I'm like, I see visions. So the community stuff I'm cool with, but I need to see consistency. And, when I see consistency and people's brands, like shouts out to Reduced Lunch podcast, man. They like they're basically the biggest podcast on my network.
Your
like,
A students.
They're running and gunning. So I'm like, man, I just see visions in them. So I'm like, I need to be going in some of these rooms and seeing who they can pair up with and be able to like pull some of their personality out so I can be able to see if I can shop around some deals for them or something, or put them in place where they can be able to expand. So, but I don't want to do that for people that's not being consistent. So
now, coming from the blogging world, I remember when I first started out, I joined a blogging network, and it sort of is really similar to what's going on with some podcast networks, including your own that I see out here. Is there any kind of like collaboration going on between the shows within your specific network? Like you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. We got a new episode dropping, I'll share it, or I'll invite this co-host on from this show. Is there any kind of that kind of collaboration going on between the network, which seems like a big benefit for it?
Oh yes, definitely. Like now, I will say this: like when we did Fly Sauce and Teas, the virtual festival with that, I had all the podcasters do a show, but everybody was on board with everybody. Like at the end of the day, we're all family. Like it's that family base. So when anybody got something going on, the person that might be doing the least will really come up in front and like share, and everybody, like the network, the will definitely goes. So I love that part, and I would love to do like work with other podcast networks. I want to find out some other podcast networks and bring my subdivision to their subdivision, and we all be neighbors and go from there. Because I want to see how everybody else works. So I want to do it respectfully. I think y'all do a great job too with the podcast, the group. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so many walks of life in there.
True.
And like I've met a lot of good people in that chat that I talk to this day, and that be at these meetings, at these quarterly meetings that y'all have, and I've met a lot of good people. So I just want to continue that networking part of it, because to me, I feel like even if it was just me podcasting, I just still feel like it's just this lone sport, and I feel like it's this wild, wild west, and it's like I don't want nobody in the same field as me getting caught up in that stuff. Like, respectfully.
And I think that's the best tool that podcasters at our respectable level can do is network. Like, we've really got to stick together. I think we've got to promote where we can. We've got to cross, pollinate podcasts and guest on this show. And I think that is our best tool, especially like that viewpoint of what you were saying about, sharing resources. I think that has definitely been probably the most advantageous part of having the Jax Podcasters Unite group. Is originally like it was just started as I just want to see how many other podcasts are out there in Jacksonville doing this, and then as we started to meet a lot of them and podcasts started like growing and it became like more of a thing to do, and there was more podcasters like emerging, like it was becoming apparent that man, these guys need the resources that a lot of us longtime podcasters have already like gained or experiences and like the lessons we've learned.
And that's and speaking from that's one note that we always try to hammer home at every single meeting is that community or that collaboration over competition aspect of it. And Badr, you've recently helped launch another podcast for Insta famous Bart of Darkness. He has like 100,000 followers on Instagram or something ridiculous. But he has just recently launched a podcast called Simpsons is Greater Than. And in what ways, if any, has that launch helped with your own podcast?
Just kind of traffic. So, shout out to Warren. I'm definitely going to be telling him about this. Yeah, I know his head, will only get bigger and his ego, but, that sense of collaboration. So Warren has spent years building an audience on Instagram. I mean, it's colossal. He's found a niche. He's very genuine about it. He's built, like I said,
a famous Simpsons room.
Yeah, like a dedicated just audience. So when he asked about, hey, I want to start a podcast. I'm coming to you, and I'd love your help. The only thing I as far as benefit or like, okay, what's the angle? What's in it for me was I knew that if I could help him launch a podcast, I knew that he would, knowing Warren, he would pay respect. He would he would mention us, and whatnot. So it's kind of like, I'll share my knowledge of podcasting. And if you don't mind helping, like putting our name in front of your audience, and whoever bites. I'm not here to, take anything from your show or have any sense of ownership. Like, I commend you. I am a big advocate of podcasting. I will happily help you grow your show. The only benefit in there for us was just that cross-pollination. So that
syndication I thought was really great. Can you touch on that a little bit?
So we went ahead and piloted. So me and him recorded a bonus episode. I interviewed him about his show. We were just kind of building up the hype about it. And then we premiered his pilot episode. He was fortunate enough to interview the voice of Lisa Simpson, Yardley Smith. We piloted that initial episode on our show. We had a lot of plays. I mean, it's still getting plenty of downloads. And then he launched his podcast 2 weeks ahead. We actually had planned to pilot 2 of his episodes, but after I saw the numbers for the first one, I said, hey, man, out of just respect for you, I think you should go ahead and launch your show. Like, no more waiting. Like, I don't want any confusion as to whose show it is. Like, own it, drop it, like, just go for it. And had we premiered another episode, I'm sure the numbers would have been great, but it would have been a detriment to his launch and his podcast. So that was really cool to have, just kind of like the ability to take myself out of like, host mode of my own show and to Allison, like, share my resources and play kind of like the producer role for the first time and helping him get set up. And he's off to the races, man. Like, he just launched his show last week. He dropped 3 episodes all at once. I mean, he's already on the road to, like, not to divulge too much of his information, but a good number of downloads for the first 5 days.
And didn't he get a famous reply on the new podcast already?
Yeah, I mean, he's got so many cosigns. I'm so excited to see what he can do, and he is a testament to just the power of podcasting as an additional kind of channel and resource to have when it comes to being a content creator. Because I do consider a content creator. I think it takes a lot of work to orchestrate and run a successful Instagram, which you can kind of compare to owning a brand. I think Warren has a brand. I think Bar Darkness is a brand. So the skills that he developed creating this Instagram page translated fairly well into creating a podcast. He's got to think about what's the vibe, what's in it for the consumer. How do I want to portray this? What's the show going to be about? So it was fun to kind of guide him and to have that to be kind of in that blast radius and have our own show kind of get propped up as well.
And I think an important sort of takeaway for the audience in that respect is that syndication is your friend. You own the content. You have the media files. If somebody else, if a podcast network or another show is looking for more content that's relative to their audience, there is zero problem with sharing your media files with somebody else. And I don't want to say leeching off of their audience, but it is essentially it's getting your content in front of more eyes that maybe has never heard of you before.
And here's the thing. Listeners are going to do what listeners do. Consumers will do as consumers do. There's no way I could have forced anyone to stick around with the podcast. They probably were there just because that episode happened to be up. Do I believe that some of them might have, some of his many, thousands of fans might have been comic book fans that were like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. Like, Warren co-signs them and I like, what they have to offer. I'll stick around. Yeah, absolutely. But I went into it knowing that, this might not work out well. There is a possibility that maybe no one comes over here to check out this pilot episode and they're only going to wait for the official. But it was a risk I took because I was very passionate. And to Al's point, I saw the drive too. I think when you're dealing with other podcasters or especially I feel like podcasting, because it is such a lone sport. And there are some days where you'll put out an episode and you look at the stats and it's like, what the hell am I doing this for? But I saw a drive in him and a consistency that I was like, nah, he's got something. He's got a built-in audience already. All he needs is just to be taught, like, how to put the wheels on the bike, and he'll go.
Well, I guess sort of backing off that. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, well, first off, congratulations on that release, man. And then it's to me, I feel like that's marketing 101. That's marketing creation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's marketing, brother. Like, that's straight up marketing.
And it's not like our two brands were complete opposites. He's all about The Simpsons and the cultural impact. We're about comic books and pop culture. We've had him on the show. It's been one of our best played episodes. Like, we've covered TV shows and animation and animations and things like that. So it wasn't outside of the realm of possibility,
Now, knowing both of your backstories and recent dabblings in other areas of the podcasting world, if you had a chance to set up a podcast tomorrow, what, if anything, would you do differently?
I would probably I'd probably lean in more into understanding stats and analytics. As this Joe Budden kind of fiasco, or not really fiasco, but this Joe Budden stuff happens, I think you would, as a listener, as a podcaster, as a content creator, you would be remiss if you did not pick up on kind of the root problem, which I feel is the lack of transparency and analytics. And apparently, I guess, Joe Rogan is also facing that too, for YouTube and things like that. But there's a reason why I think someone like Joe Budden is making such a big deal about his gripes with Spotify because of their lack of transparency, because of, the lack of data that he's getting. Like, that is important, man. I think it's vital to not only your personal growth and encouragement too. I think there are times that we can all say that when we've noticed, like, oh wow, that episode got a couple plays. All right, like, I'm doing this for a reason. Data is just important. When you cater data for a specific purpose, that's when it becomes information. And I think that, information is valuable. It can be a weapon for good and bad. But I would lean into understanding your analytics, understanding what these stats mean. All of that stuff has a meaning. It has a purpose. So probably just like really devoting time to understanding how your downloads and listenerships and why certain things grow or decline at certain rates.
Well, if you're starting a new podcast, you don't have any analytics. So how would the lessons of years of podcasting, would you flip it into a new show?
That is a good question.
Very good question.
I will say that I feel like the analytics can be drastically improved. If I were to improve one aspect of podcasting, the analytics is the biggest piece of it, because coming from the website world, I can see where my visitors come from. I can see how many, how long they stay on a certain page. I can see what page they left, if they looked at any other pages. I wish I could get that kind of information from podcasting as well.
And you know what, I think you bring up a great point. I am giving advice from someone who's been doing it for years. That that is probably my biggest regret, being the only term I can think of at the moment. I wish I would have learned the analytics or tracked those better, especially knowing that I've been doing it for 8 years. Like, if I would have known, hey, I'm going to be doing this for 8 years, I need to go ahead and keep track of this now. I guess from a brand new perspective, it would definitely be trying to find just the perfect niche. And I know that's kind of broad, perfect. What is a perfect niche? But finding that niche that I can feel passionate about the content, that makes the content stand out, whether that be, for SEO value or just, for finding or for grabbing the attention of a specific group. Like, for example, like Warren. He deals with Simpsons, which is one of the biggest shows in the world, but the fan base and the things that he dabbles in are very niche, and he doesn't have much competition that I feel like. So I think that when he told me that, hey, I'm starting a podcast, it just clicked for me. I was like, man, you definitely got to start a podcast. So I think between consistency and really honing the message and the content of your show to something very, obtainable but just the right niche to where you're not having to face so many people, competition and things like that.
But Al, what if you start a podcast tomorrow, or if you bring on a new podcast, to your network, what would you do differently?
So to piggyback on the consistency and the niche part, I would definitely hone into that more when it comes to a new podcast. So prime example, my first podcast that I started was the Groove Suite podcast. And I didn't even realize back then how much of a niche that we had when it came to that. Because we it focuses on music, but it focuses specifically on neo soul music. So it was a certain genre that we was focused on, and the competition was damn near none. If there was any competition of that, it was definitely outside of Jacksonville. So what we were doing and what I'm still doing with the Groove Suite, it's this standalone type of thing because nobody is speaking on that. I would say maybe Cloud Sessions, Hip Hop and Hookah.
Mm-hmm.
We're parallel to that. You got that, and you got Taste Test. Shouts out to Damian Lamar. So those are relevant now, but back then, they respectfully hadn't started. So I think if I would have honed in on that a little bit more back in the day, I would have been all right. But I would definitely focus on that a lot more now.
Man.
I would and it's funny because we started this. we got this phrase that we say now. What's your groove? So when we say what's your groove, that basically means what song are you listening to, and and that's our niche. Every time I post it in the group, in the Groove Suite group or anywhere on Twitter or whatever, we get a very good response from it, and it's definitely a conversation starter. So, but I didn't even realize that was that was that important.
Yeah.
Back then. So now, I definitely would be focused on that. I agree with the niche and the consistency part. The analytics part, for sure, that's number one on my list.
Yeah, and I think the analytics come into play when you are confident. I think the analytics really come into play maybe when you've established your show a little bit, when you're a year or two in, and you feel this is something that I can see me doing for a good bit of time. I think that's when you lean in on that. I think initially for startup, it's really honing in. What is my message? What is the show about? How am I different from every other show? Do I have a niche? Because that niche will play a big part in, and I think Joe Budden had kind of touched on this, which is, he's cultivated this audience and this dedicated fan base. And I'll confidently say, I think that's one of the biggest strengths that I've got for my podcast, the Shortbox, is that, our audience we have such a dedicated fan base. Now, granted, it's not, in the thousands, but it's a good bit of people. It's a good bit of people that tune in every week, that are loyal, that understand all the lingo, all the inside jokes that we got. And we do our damn best to put a spotlight on them and make them feel hey, we recognize you, even if we haven't met you, you're a friend of the show. So I think that'd be another piece that I'd add to it too, is making your fan base feel like they are heard, that they're a part of the show, that they are investors, even if they might not, be donating money, but making them feel like they are heard, and really leveraging the strength of that too. It's great to know that we can have an event, or we can do a call to action to our audience. And granted, like I said, it's not in the thousands, but it's a good enough bit to where it's a factor. It could be the difference between us being voted for a certain title or reaching a certain goal. So I would definitely lean in on establishing a fan base early and cultivating that, spending time with them and making that, just building that audience up.
And not getting discouraged if you see, 5 plays on your first episode.
Yeah.
Because to both of y'all's points, being consistent is something that I admittedly have struggled with for a while. Ever since leaving radio a year and a half ago, I did a weekly show, sometimes twice a week for a very long time. So it was very easy to republish that same content to my podcast feed. But now that I'm solo, with the exception of this show, but now that I mostly am solo, keeping that consistency and not getting deterred by, a low play count on one episode, that doesn't mean that the next episode is not going to have a high, play count. So I think keeping that consistency is one of the most important takeaways for new podcasters in order to hammer home. As long as your audience can expect a new episode, even if it's 3 people, that's 3 people more than plenty of other people who aren't creating podcasts out there. And I want to say, I think that somewhere close to like 70% of podcasts out there are limited run, or they don't have a new episode anymore. So you think that it's a crowded market out there, and it does feel increasingly crowded as far as podcasting is concerned, but not everybody is keeping up with the consistency aspect, which I think is very important.
Yeah, you got to kind of just have like tough skin and be a little like obsessed, like almost kind of crazy. When it comes to podcasting, because there are times where the payout or the payback isn't really that great. I mean, you've got to be really dedicated, and that's why I say like find a niche that like you're passionate about, because you've got to be able to have self-drive in doing this. I remember plenty of times in the early days where I was just like, I don't think anyone is listening other than me. But lo and behold, I came across those people because just out of consistency and just really dedication, like you got to have crazy amount of dedication, and belief in your show, and being willing to grow and be like critical, but also and still maintain that passion and that drive to produce more content.
Mm-hmm. Agreed on all of it. Totally agreed. I'm real big on the consistency part too. Yeah. Totally agree on the consistency part. Like, I mean, you think nobody's listening, but as soon as you slip, as soon as you don't post that one episode, you could be going for 3 months straight, and you take a week off, somebody gonna come and be like, hey.
Which is a great feeling, to be honest.
It is, but boy, do you feel like, are you serious? I wanted 1 week. Like, I just wanted 1 week off. Like, that's all I needed was like one. I had family stuff,
Right.
All right. Well, I think that about does it. I think that's a good closing point for this show in particular. And I personally want to thank both of you for joining me. I think it was a fascinating discussion on the business side of podcasting. Plus, it was a little nice to get my feet wet with co-hosts again. So I guess for new listeners, where can they see more of your work? Al, I'll start with you.
So you can go to mpn-llc.com. That's the website for Mr. Peterson's Neighborhood. You can follow MPN Management on Instagram and Twitter and on Facebook. And you can follow me personally at Mr. Alpete. So it's MRALPETE on everywhere. No 904, no Mr. Dun. It's straight Mr. Alpete everywhere. I'm most active on Twitter, then Instagram, then Facebook. But nevertheless, come follow us and see what we got going on in the neighborhood.
Definitely. Absolutely. Badr?
If you are a fan, even a diehard, or someone just remotely interested in comic books, comic book movies, pop culture discussions, if you're looking for recommendations into any of those, or interviews of industry professionals like comic writers, artists, musicians, actors, etc., blah blah blah, I will highly encourage you to check out the Shortbox podcast. We are Jacksonville's premier comic book and pop culture podcast. We've been doing this since 2012. We're nearing our 300th episode, so we've got a backlog full of episodes, and I'm sure you'll find something fun and that'll pique your interest. We are all over social media as The Shortbox Jax, sometimes JAX, but The Shortbox Jax. We're also on most podcast apps, so whether it be Apple, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, Google, etc., just search the Shortbox Podcast. Thank you guys for checking it out.
Thank you, Badr. Thank you, Al. And as for me, you can find more of my work, bonjourwithblythe.com, and a variety of social media platforms at Blythe Brum. That's BlytheBrum. Any of the topics that we talked about in today's show, I will list them and link them in the show notes. So be sure to check out those links in case you want to read and watch a little bit more of what we were talking about. But until next time, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you real soon.